artists, there lived a family known only as the musicians. And they were the greatest musicians in all the land. Many would travel leagues just to hear them play or to have them teach them. Now, every member in this family, well, they were musically gifted, except the youngest. Bertram, he was called. Not just gone 18, gangly and gawking and tall in all the wrong ways. And he could not play a note of music. Every time he tried, it sounded discordant and jarring and unpleasant. And so, seeing as his family were low on money, he turned his trade to that of carpentry, and he began to bring gold in for his family. Now the king of this land was a wise and generous and kind man, and he had often had arguments in his court of who was the greatest artist, which art was superior to another, and he was sick of it. And the king decided he would hold a competition to see who was the greatest artist. Naturally, there was a prize, a lifetime supply of gold and the title of court artist. No doubt that would be coveted for many generations and would end the arguments forever. So Bertram's family decided to enter. And Bertram went with them, saddened that he could not help them. But he went on to cheer them. And on the day of the competition, he found a small woodland glade. Beautiful place. And with the guitar that he carried around, for sentimental reasons, a block of wood and a knife, he sat on a rock and he began to whittle. And every once in a while, he'd put his carving down, and he'd pick up his guitar. He'd strum. It never sounded right. And so he went back to his whittling. And he slipped, and the knife dug into his thumb, and the blood welled up in the wound. He shaked him. He dropped the sculpture he'd been working on, and it rolled under a bush. And he thought he heard a tinkling giggle. It was closer to the sound of water than it was anything else. Picking up his guitar, he walked over to the bush and moved those leaves aside. In the ground, there was a hole the size of a dinner plate. And he did a double take, really, because beside that hole were two minute figures, dressed all in green, wicked smiles on their faces, and the wings of dragonflies on their backs. And the smiles on their face vanished. And as he turned to run, they buzzed up into his face, aggressive like wasps. And somewhere between them getting larger and him getting smaller, they bundled him down that hole. And as they flew, dragging Bertram down the hole, he realized that his captors were the fairies. He knew the stories. The fairies were the spirits, magic, nature, and mischief. And as they flew further and further, there were noises that were at first muddy and indistinguishable. And they became clear and they crystallized into the sounds of laughter, of joy and merrymaking. And he realized they were taking him to the heart of the fairy realm. And they brought him in, and there was such a feast like you have never seen. The tables groaned under the weight of the food, and as they brought him down, his stomach rumbled as those smells made their way into his nose. And he grabbed a bite of bread and a quaff of wine. And he was brought before the king of the Fae. And as the guards began to tell the king what happened, he raised one hand after eyeing Bertram up and down from his pauper's clothes to his cheap guitar. And he pointed. Play. Play for your life. Bertram quivered from head to foot. He had no choice. He took up his guitar and he took a breath, which may very well be his last. And he strummed. And the chord was not jarring, discordant, but beautiful and perfect. He was taken up in the flow of the music, letting the brush move the artist. And so the music painted a picture in sound, and it was beautiful. When he was done, the whole court had silenced to look at him. The king looked at him. "Where did you learn to play like that, boy?" Bertram told him how he'd actually never been able to play before in his life, how it had caused him great sorrow his whole time, how he'd not been able to help his family out in times they needed, and how he couldn't help them in the king's competition. And so, King of the Fae thought for a moment. And he thought for another. And he thought for a third. "I still do not understand how you could play so well." And Bertram, he fell onto his knees. "I beg your forgiveness, your Majesty. I stole a bite of fairy bread and a quaff of fairy wine. I know I shouldn't have, even though I knew the stories. I'm so sorry." And it dawned on the king. Because the magic of the Fae ran through him, Bertram could play. He clicked his fingers, and the two greatest craftsmen came to his side. And they took the guitar, and they began to weave spells, the warp and the weft of magic. And several hours passed, and when they were done, they returned the guitar to Bertram. It was beautiful, indistinguishably old yet new all at once. And when he plucked one of those strings, the note hung in the air, light as gossamer. And the king said, "Bertram, this is my gift to you for your honesty. And if with this gift you can go and win your competition, then you will return to me, and you will marry my daughter." Fair deal. And the notes that guitar made, they were beautiful. And Bertram strummed it as he walked away to the guards and took him home, back to his own realm. And he was brought back onto that woodland glade, and he wandered into the court of the king, where he found his family waiting, tense, nervous, as name by name was called out, until finally they joined. And he picked up a tambourine, did Bertram, as their family moved into the court. His family looked shocked and appalled. No, but he was determined. And so, when they started playing, so too did he. His beats sharp and on time. And they looked at him. He was doing all right. In fact, he was doing great. And as the music lulled, he put down the tambourine, he picked up his guitar, and he began to play, and he played the most beautiful music you have ever heard. And his family, they joined him, and for the first time, they played as a family. None know how long they played for. Some say minutes, others say hours. But I can tell you that when the king was done listening, he laughed and he cried and he laughed. And he needed not to hear another performance. He immediately gave the winning award to Bertram's family. A lifetime of gold they took. However, Bertram was the only one announced to be the court artist. And so, making his excuses and his thanks to the king for his generosity, Bertram returned to the woodland glade, where this time the fairies greeted him with smiles. And somewhere between them getting larger and him getting smaller, they took him down. And he found himself beside the princess. And he lived happily ever after.